Alrighty, and then we are going to cover our last section of human resources, which is conflict and conflict resolution. The three main causes that lead to conflict in the workplace, the number one is going to be miscommunication. So anytime there are unclear expectations, there was any type of distraction or distortion in our communication, or maybe someone was excluded from communicating or excluded from a meeting, that causes issues and it causes conflict in the workplace. Partially because maybe that exclusion or that miscommunication led to an error in completing a job or a problem with coworkers or maybe even just some hurt feelings. Those all types of communication like that can lead to conflict depending on the employees involved. The second most common cause of conflict is going to be differing ideas or beliefs. And this one is really centered around that culture and subculture because you may have different behaviors, different actions, different lifestyles than your coworkers. And those are all based around the cultural groups that you're in and the subcultural groups that you're in. And we know that from some of our examples in our practices earlier this unit. But depending on how this person interprets those differences or how tolerant they are to differences, that can also cause conflict in the workplace. And then lastly are just emotions. This is not quite as common, but it does still happen where simply somebody's feelings are hurt or someone feels differently based on the miscommunication or based on the different ideas or beliefs. So a lot of times this emotional factor can play a role in a bigger conflict that is being caused by one of the first two. We have two types of conflicts. We have functional conflict, and this is actually conflict that is good and it's healthy. Functional conflict is going to lead to cooperation and lead to adaptation in the workplace. So maybe we are having a conflict over a work practice that isn't really commonplace anymore. It needs to be changed. It needs to evolve. And so this type of conflict has led us to the conclusion that we need to change some of these policies or some of these practices. It also leads to a lot of problem solving. It helps us be able to work through these problems in a constructive and in a healthy way. And anytime we are encouraging cooperation and we are encouraging adaptation or problem solving, that's the best time that we can have our best job performance. So functional conflict is when it's optimal for job performance, and it does help us move forward, make decisions, and sometimes it even can strengthen those bonds between employees and coworkers. Being able to work through this conflict in a positive manner can lead to better interactions in the future. The flip side of this is dysfunctional conflict. Dysfunctional conflict is categorized by really low creativity and low cooperation. So these employees aren't really looking to work together. They're not really looking for the best solution to the problem at hand. And it can also be characterized as being really high with apathy. And apathy just means that I don't really care about what's happening right now. I don't care about the problem. I don't care about the project. I'm really not that interested in solving it. Additionally, this leads to poor job performance. Functional conflict leads to optimal job performance. This leads to poor job performance. It oftentimes causes a lot of distractions among employees. So they're so wrapped up in this dysfunctional conflict that they aren't doing their jobs how they are supposed to be. They're distracted. They have low performance. And then this also can lead to a poor use of resources. So because we're not really that focused on solving any problems or fixing the root problem and the root conflict, we're just going to kind of throw some resources at it, hope that it wraps itself up rather than taking the most efficient route possible. We're going to have three main conflict resolution strategies, and we're going to talk about them each individually. So we start off with the avoidance strategy. And this is just where I'm going to avoid the conflict, and I'm going to do this by either withdrawing from the problem totally, or I'm going to postpone it. I'm going to tell them that I'll put it off till later and I'll handle it at some other time. That may not seem like the most efficient way, but there are good times to use this avoidance strategy. This is going to be if there's a small problem. Maybe it's something pretty minor. It's one of those situations where it's just an emotional problem. two employees are butting heads, maybe I'm just going to ignore this problem because it's so little, it'll eventually solve itself. And I don't want those relationships between employees to be negatively impacted. This is also a really good strategy if this is a really big problem that the root of this conflict is that there is an even larger problem that needs to be solved first. So if this kind of sub problem, this problem that is branching off of this root conflict that's happening, I'm going to try and postpone this one so that I can go fix that larger problem first and then move on to the smaller conflicts that that larger problem had started. And then additionally, this is going to be the strategy if you need some more information. This happens a lot when one employee will go to the HR manager with a conflict involving another employee. So I'm going to hear what they have to say, and then I'm going to use this avoidance strategy to postpone solving this problem until I have time to go back and either do a full investigation, talk to some managers, or at least talk to the other employee and get their perspective. So the avoidance strategy, while it sounds negative, it is not always a negative strategy to use. Secondly, we have the compromise strategy. And the compromise strategy is the ideal scenario, but it only works if both people are interested in making a change to reach that common good or that kind of balancing act between the two employees. This is best to use if you are trying to save some time and it's not a hugely complex problem. If both employees are doing something that is kind of right or neither of them are really wrong, then this would be a really good way to save time and resolve the problem. This is also a really good strategy if both employees are truly committed to equally finding a solution to the problem. And then again, like I kind of said, this is also the strategy you want to use if neither person is really wrong. Maybe both of their behaviors are equally appropriate or equally important. They're just unhappy with the behaviors of the other person. That doesn't make anyone really wrong. So we're going to use this compromise strategy. Both people are going to bend just a little bit in order to solve the problem. And then lastly, we have the win-lose strategy. And this is going to be where one person is supported while the other is not. With the compromise strategy, both people were partially supported. This is going to be one person fully supported, one person not supported. And we use this strategy if only one of the behaviors or one of the actions is appropriate. Maybe the other one is breaking some policies for the company. Obviously, their decisions cannot be upheld because it breaks those policies. We also use win-lose if there are some time constraints and we don't have enough time to do a full investigation. We might just go with our gut off of which action is the most correct. This third one I kind of touched on already. This is going to be the strategy that we use if there are company policies in place telling us what we need to be doing for this type of behavior. And then this also may happen if this single action has caused multiple conflicts. So maybe the behavior from employee A isn't really wrong, but because of that behavior, 3 or 4 smaller conflicts have arisen from it. In order to kind of alleviate the impact that has on human resource management, we're going to just force employee A to stop this behavior because we don't have the time to deal with 4 or 5 problems that are constantly being caused by this one action. Even though it's not necessarily a completely wrong action, it is not something that we want to continue doing just because it's causing too many other smaller problems. And then communication and conflict, they do impact HR in the sense of employee relations. And employee relations is a really big part of human resource management. This falls within that interacting with employees piece of those 3 main categories that HRM works within. And employee relations is just going to be creating positive relationships between management and employees, and then helping maintain or manage relationships, again, between management and employees or just between different employees at the same level. So human resources is going to be in charge of trying to create positive relationships between all levels of employees, as well as managing and maintaining those positive relationships, which is why they are involved in the conflict resolution, because when they are the one resolving this conflict, it does help mitigate those relationships between other employees who might normally be unhappy with each other. And we are going to move on to the exit slip on Canvas in order to kind of practice and just touch on the knowledge that we just learned.